Alright, set 8 stuff is here. Even though I got my stuff a bit late, gotta do some deck profiles because I'm still waiting for my Bladmire and Youthberg stuff. But anyway, we're going to be doing a deck profile today on the Wirbel deck, because Wirbel as a deck brings back a lot of nostalgia to me. Based on its design, it definitely looks like Vortex Dragon, and that's kind of the reason why I decided to build the deck. Originally released as a solo boss unit promo for a character in Dear Days 2, became a full-on ride line in set 8 a few months after, which was a bit of a surprise, but it made the deck way more playable, and I'm actually glad they actually did this because they gave it a full-on deck, which actually makes me pretty happy. And seeing that it's basically similar to Kagero old playstyle, it was definitely going to be very simple to play and very budget friendly in many ways. Because a lot of Dragon Empire generic stuff focuses on retiring your opponent's stuff, which is exactly how this card plays anyway. And with all those generic stuff the Dragon Empire has that is just focused on retire, you can definitely make use of certain engines. And that is one strong point about the deck. And of course, another strong point about this deck is the constant energy gain. And it's partially because of Wirbel itself. But other than that, the main weakness about this deck so far is that in many ways it does lack some support. Mainly on the countercharge department, because every retire is one counterblast in a practical sense, or one soul blast depending on how you build the deck. And right now Dragon Empire is one of those nations that lack easy countercharge. You have mainly attack hit countercharge, and that's not exactly reliable, and I don't like attack hits. But anyway, with all that out of the way, I would have to say the deck is very budget friendly if you want to get started, and the deck is also very simple to play as well, so I can recommend this deck if you do want to choose it as a budget deck, although not every card, spoiler, in my deck right here is going to be budget friendly, but you can use alternate options. But anyway, let's just bring this nostalgia and start the deck profile. So first off, with the ride line, here's the Lizard Soldier Hissen, which looks like Conroe. And then to the grade 1, Jiyoku, which when your grade 2 rides on top of it, you can Energy Blast 3 to draw a card and plus 5k power. You're already guaranteed the 3 energy once you hit your grade 1, whether you go first or second, but this 3 energy part isn't exactly too bad, just because if you do go second, you might end up being over energy. So that's fine on its own, but that also means that you can't really use the energy generics, because the energy generics uses either 3 energy or counterblast to draw a card, and either one can be a hindrance sometimes. In which we go to the grade 2, where your grade 3 Wirbel that rides on top of it has his auto skill for free, which will be explained. So we go to Wirbel Dragon itself, that definitely is not Vortex Dragon. So at the beginning of your main phase, energy charge 3. So by the time you hit your first grade 3 ride, it's either 6 energy because your ride line is going to use up 3, or 9 energy, which is already fine, and that's why I mean that you don't want to overflow on energy, because if you do not use the energy blast 3, if you go second, you're going to go 12, and you can't go 12 because it's max 10. In which the second skill, which is not once per turn, keep this in mind, and it will be important because you can use 3 energy to choose one of your opponent's rear guards to retire it, but you could not retire anything plus 5k, but if your opponent's at least grade 3 plus 10k instead. Easy retire, you get 3 energy per turn, and another 3 from this card, making a total of 6 energy, and you're going to be using it twice to kill 2 things. So that thing is going to be very important for the next skill, because once per turn, at the end of our attack, if you use at least 6 energy during the turn, you can counterblast 1 to stand it with a drive -2, but then you can soul blast a copy of itself for a drive +1 into the end turn. So basically on a Persona Ride turn, you can actually restand this with a drive check. In a way, it feels a bit like Varga a bit, because it's basically a restander with no drive checks. But it's very simple as that. You just basically kill 2 things each turn and then just restand this. And this counterblast is going to get a bit heavy just because of the rest of your cards that are going to retire. Now, it's not completely necessary, because the most important thing is that you're going to use the skill of this card twice so you can restand it. But with all the other stuff that you kind of play, you're going to kind of run out of counterblast pretty quick. I will just let you know that right now, considering our options are a bit lacking. But overall, as a solar boss unit, it's actually pretty good that you could just fill in the gaps basically. In which we continue on with the grade 3 lineup at the main deck, with of course 3 more for Persona Ride and for its own skill at full power. And then a card that I like to run is Tribash. So Tribash, considering that this is a retire heavy deck, your opponent usually is going to have 2 or less rearguards, because when your Vanguard attacks while your opponent has at least 2 or less rearguards, you can put it to soul to crit +1 to your Vanguard into the end turn, which is very nice for early game crit pressure. But not only that, because of how I built my deck, you will be using a bit of soul. So basically this is just a way to regain some soul while also giving your Vanguard some pressure, hence why I decided to run the Tri-Bash. And 4 has been working out pretty well for me actually. That's why I kind of like it. And then another card that you can definitely run is definitely the Best Harvest. Best Harvest being probably the best card in the deck that replaces your Cycler draw, because it gives your Vanguard the skill where during the main phase, if your opponent's card is getting retired, you draw a card. And each one retired equals 1 draw. And considering that Wirbel is going to retire at least 2 if your opponent has rear guards, you're going to draw 2 cards from that. And adding on top of other skills, you're definitely going to be drawing a lot. That's why I really love Best Harvest in this deck. And technically you can bump it up to 4, but depending on the matchup, this could be a dead card. Mainly the ones that focuses on your opponent controlling their own rear guards, which could end up being you retiring nothing, so this could end up being a dead card. But at the same time, your opponent knowing that you have this is also a good thing, because it could mean that your opponent might need to play a different way to control their board. And they definitely do not want to be giving you a bunch of draw. But against those rearguard heavy decks, this is definitely going to be awesome because you're going to be drawing definitely a lot. So I do recommend running this card. And so that's it for the grade 3 lineup to the grade 2 lineup. So first off, Drag Ritter Berserah. So on place, while your Vanguard is at least a grade 3 Wirbel, or the card in your ride deck is a grade 3 Wirbel, because you're going to need to reveal it. This is the start of this trend. You can Counterblast 1 and choose one of your opponent's rear guards to retire, but you couldn't retire, you draw a card. This is just more extended retire and more draw power if you need it. And in a way, that extra retire is always very helpful, and extra draw is always very helpful. It punishes your opponent for having no board. So this is just one of them. But the second skill is the main part, because for every 3 energy that you use with Wirbel Dragon, it gets plus 5k power. You will be using it at least twice per turn, but there are times I do find myself using it at least 3 times or even 4 times. So this card is going to get a huge power buff on its own, which is very nice. And then the next cards are all generic, so you can run whatever you want. So first off, the Meteor Flare Dragon, just for more retire, but not only that, but also in a way gets over resist type abilities, because it nullifies the whole entire circle and then you retire the rear guard. So it's just a way to get around some pesky rear guards basically. And it also gets plus 10k if your opponent has no rear guards, which I do find myself in many situations where your opponent has no rear guards anyway. And against certain matchups where they control their own rear guards, this is still going to be pretty good and useful. And then finally, to the last card, which is a generic. It's the Soul Blast Draw 1 card generic. This card, other than one other card that uses Soul Blast and it's going to be the main card, you don't really have ways to really Soul Charge in this deck other than Tri-Bash, but that's actually not the main reason why I'm running for this. Partially, I am running it for the draw part, but the second part of the skill is that during the Persona Ride turn, you can Counterblast 1 to choose one of your opponent's columns to retire. That is 2 retires for 1 Counterblast, which can be huge, especially if you're playing Best Harvest. That's why I'm running 4 of this, because it's just extra retire for 1 Counterblast, which also gives you another draw. Hence why this card is just too good not to run 4 of. Now, if this card is too expensive in your budget, go ahead and run something else, but I do personally like this card in the deck. And now to the grade 1 lineup. So first off, to the main booster is Iverness. So when your Vanguard is at least a grade 3 Wirbel, it gets these skills. On place, you energy charge 3, but you cannot use the axe skill of the energy generator, aka the draw skill, but you're not doing that because you're going to be using it for Wirbel. This is basically 1 free retire for Wirbel, and because you're using 3 more energy for Wirbel's retire, that means your other cards could get a plus another 5k. And that's what I mean, that sometimes you will use over 6 energy for the retires. Especially with this one, it extends it even further. But the next skill is when this card boosts while your Vanguard's Wirbel plus 5k, and then at the end of the battle that it boosts at least a grade 3 Wirbel, you can Soul Blast 1 to stand this unit. Basically, it's a restand booster, which is very helpful. Only thing is, watch out for the soul, because in many ways you're not going to get the soul back other than through Tri-Bash, especially if you're using the cyclers for the discard. And then the next grade 1, which technically belongs to the deck but is absurdly generic, is Draglitter, Nihamra. So on place, you can kind of look at top 7 cards of your deck for 1 grade 3 from window and add it to your hand, and if you missed, you countercharge 1. This is overall just pretty good just because it lets you search for a grade 3 from the top 7, and all your grade 3s so far in this deck, you kind of want to search anyway. If you search Best Harvest, cool. If you search Wirbel, next turn. If you get Tribash, more soul and crit pressure. So this card is just already good to run at 4, although if you're on a budget, you might not be able to play this, I will admit that, especially since technically it does belong with the deck and it's supporting for the deck, with the second skill of, if your opponent's rearguard was either retired or bound this turn, plus 5k, so being a 13k on its own, whether attacker or booster, is always pretty nice, but mainly for the grade 3 search, which is generic by the way. And then finally, 2 order searchers, just for Best Harvest if you need it, and I can't find any other good grade ones to run, so I'm choosing this one. And then finally 4 PGs, biggest PGs. And to the trigger lineup, OT, no reason not to run OT. 8 crits for full on pressure, especially on a restanding Vanguard. 3 draws, and 4 heals, 2 being counters. And so that's it for this deck profile on my Wirbel Dragon deck. What do you guys think of it? What cards would you recommend? And what changes would you make? So far, I've been liking the deck on how it is. It did take me a bit of time to figure out on how I want to build this deck, especially since it was a boss unit that was a solo one that was released as a promo that became a full-on ride line in set 8. And considering that all the generics Dragon Empire stuff that I found in the past, there was definitely ways to actually make this deck pretty usable. And for me, this is how I decided to build the deck. And overall, I kind of like it. Brings back some nostalgia for Kagero, especially on its design and its playstyle, especially since the deck is very budget friendly and in many ways very cheap, not on certain cards, but for a budget player, this deck is definitely recommendable. And especially since it is simple to play, since all it does is focus on retired. But other than that, this is just my take on it. You can always have your own take, especially since it is absurdly flexible, which is a strong point about this deck. It just focuses on retire. But other than that, there's not much to say about this, but I do hope for some future support, especially for a new form since it is a Dear Days boss unit, which we do have some Dear Days boss units that already got their evolved forms. And see you all next time.